What's going on, everybody? My name is Johan Castro for UnknownMMA.com, and welcome to this edition of Afterthoughts. And in this edition, of course, we're looking back at UFC San Antonio. A pretty decent card, up and down. Not the most entertaining in terms of excitement. I want to say it was until like 9 fights in or so before we got our first finish, so maybe a little bit lacking in that department, but the name value on this card was very significant. We had a lot of high stakes and high impact bouts for a lot of divisions going forward. Of course, spearheaded in the main event by the welterweight division, where we had Rafael dos Anjos, former lightweight champion, taking on Leon Edwards. And this was a fight coming in that obviously staked a lot going forward in the title picture, but it also, once again, holds as one of those almost like a gatekeeper matchup, for lack of a better term. Dana White likes to refer to RDA as a guy who, if you can get past him, you're a legit contender. And a lot of people coming into this fight were questioning whether or not Leon Edwards was capable of getting past him. We have seen Edwards tested in the past. An example would be when he fought Gunnar Nelson back in March. Close fight, he did of course win, but it was competitive. So a lot of people thought maybe RDA is too much for him, and maybe RDA is going to put it on him and end this winning streak that Edwards has built. Well, Leon Edwards did what Colby Covington did what Kamaru Usman did, and almost did it more impressively. Almost swept the entire scorecards. He used his grappling, which I was really surprised by. I thought for sure he was going to come out trying to use that range, try to establish the jab, being the bigger guy, wanting to have RDA on the back foot. Well, RDA advanced most of the fight, and Edwards beat him with enough volume, not a lot of volume, but just enough to get past him in the stand-up game. And of course, in the grappling department, an area where everyone thought RDA was going to have the significant advantage, Edwards was able to take advantage of him there. Again, due to the size, due to the overall skill set. I mentioned it in the article I wrote earlier in the week about Edwards. He's viewed as a kickboxer. A lot of English guys are not known for their wrestling acumen. But Edwards has become a very well-rounded fighter ever since he's gotten on this win streak. And, his last loss, of course, being to Usman, where he was controlled in the grappling almost that entire fight. Now we're starting to see him come into his own as a well-rounded fighter. And going forward for Edwards, it'll be interesting to see. I don't think he'll get a title shot right away. Just because of what's in the division right now. You have Jorge Masvidal coming off of a massive win over Ben Askren. You have Colby Covington and Robbie Lawler facing off in a couple of weeks. So it almost seems a little hard-pressed to see him fighting for a title next. But definitely a number one contendership fight should be next for him. Edwards has proven that he is a legit welterweight contender. I've believed in him pretty much ever since the Bryan Barberena fight. That was his first real test. Got past Barberena in flying colors, beat Peter Sabata down, grinded him out. And then, of course, Cowboy, Gunnar Nelson, and now Rafael dos Anjos. So it'll be interesting to see what they do from a matchmaking perspective going forward with Leon, because a title shot almost seems unrealistic right now. He has won 8 in a row, and usually that would warrant a title shot. In most divisions it would, not welterweight, not in a division where you have just so much talent at the top right now. I'd like to see him fight Tyron Woodley next, personally. I think that's a good fight for him. That would serve as a title eliminator. It really would. I think the winner of that fight should get a crack at the title. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Edwards going forward. But that kid's very impressive, and I can't wait to see what he has going forward. Now, moving on down the card, co-main event, Alexei Oleinik and Walt Harris. Now, this was a fight that I think shocked everyone. No one saw that happening. I think, Walt Harris was the favorite coming in. A lot of people thought he was going to win this fight, maybe by decision, maybe he was going to get a knockout, but nobody thought he was going to do that. Nobody thought it was going to be a first round just beatdown, essentially. 12 seconds is all it took him to beat a guy who Alistair Overeem, a guy who dominated Alistair Overeem for about 4 minutes until he got finished when they fought back in April. So Walt Harris 100% gained a lot of prestige, a lot of fans, and now in the heavyweight division, a division that's shallow, a division that needs new blood, we have another new contender emerging. And the first thing I thought when I saw that finish was, or the first opponent I should say that came to mind after that finish was Derek Lewis. Derek Lewis. I want to see Walt Harris and Derek Lewis. I think that's an appropriate fight. Harris is going to be a top 10 contender when the new rankings are released. And yeah, I think Derek Lewis is a good fight for him. I don't rush him too soon. Don't give him Junior Dos Santos. That's probably too much right now. But a fight against a guy like Derek Lewis, I think makes a lot of sense for Harris. Because he looked fantastic, getting a very big win, beating a top 10 guy, beating a guy who has ample experience. I mean, a guy who probably has more fights than anyone else in the UFC, I'd venture to guess. And Walt Harris looked fantastic. He earned that $50,000 bonus, and yeah, I want to see him fight. I think Derek Lewis is appropriate going forward. If not Lewis, no, I'd say Lewis. I think Lewis is probably your best bet for him. So, we had a heavyweight co-main event, which was Oleinik and Harris, but maybe, in fact, no, I'm not even going to say maybe. The most talked about fight on the card coming in was Greg Hardy and Juan Adams, for the obvious controversy that Hardy always brings when he fights, but also because this was kind of the idea, or I should say there was an idea that Juan Adams was going to be the guy who was going to give Greg Hardy the most trouble. The stoppage was strange. It was weird. Harris shot for, or not Harris, excuse me, Juan Adams shot for that takedown, didn't get it, held on, didn't really sprawl, and then Hardy just punched him out. So it was kind of a lackluster finish. I don't know if it really, gave or took anything away from either guy, but I think Greg Hardy now has set himself up for a top 15 opponent next. Given the way the UFC rankings are, I could see him being ranked 15th coming into the week. I don't think he deserves to be ranked 15th, but I could see that happening. And I do think almost though that he has earned a high prestige fight. For example, Andrei Arlovski. That might be an interesting fight for him. Arlovski, of course, a crafty veteran, a guy who's been around forever. A guy who got a win earlier on the card. Maybe that fight going forward would be a good matchup for Hardy. I think he's now starting to move into that contendership role, though. I think he's no longer a prospect. He's now a heavyweight contender. And, I know he's a polarizing figure. I know a lot of people don't like him, and I understand why people don't like him. But the guy has talent. It's clear he has talent. I think it's now time that we test him. And I think a guy like Arlovski, a guy who's a veteran, a guy who's been around for a long time, maybe even a guy on the lower end of that top 15, I think that'd be a legitimate matchup for Hardy going forward. Prior to the Hardy fight, we had James Vick and Dan Hooker, and I don't really need to say a lot about this one. Dan Hooker's a guy who's technically very skilled. He had a rough matchup with Edson Barboza. I think, again, that might have been rushing a little too soon. I get why they did it, but I don't think he was ready for it just yet. But Dan Hooker is an elite fighter in that division. He's a big guy. He hits hard. And he's very technically sound. He's got a very well-rounded game. He's going to be a top 15 fighter. I'd like to see him fight Alexander Hernandez, who won right before he did. We'll get to him in a second. As for James Vick, he needs to move up in weight. I think, I don't know why. I mean, he's been getting caught lately. That's why he's been losing. You know, I'm not going to say, well, it's because of the weight cut. That's why he's getting caught. No, he's been getting caught because he's been getting caught. He hasn't been fighting intelligently. But the weight cut clearly has an effect on him. I think 170 fits him a lot better. Maybe even 185. He's a huge guy. He needs to move up in weight. I think if he stays at lightweight, he's just going to keep getting finished. He's hit now a rough patch in his career. It's time for him to really consider a change. And then the last thing we'll look at in this edition is Alexander Hernandez. He did get a win over Francisco Trinaldo. Underwhelming performance, though. It was a fight that could have been scored for Trinaldo. I actually scored it 29-28 for Trinaldo when I was watching that fight. It just was not convincing from him. And I almost think when watching him perform that he has remnants of that Cowboy loss in his head. So now he's afraid to pull the trigger a little bit. Did get the win. Good for him. Very lackluster performance. I think his stock dropped even with the win. Like I said, I think he and Dan Hooker could be a good fight going forward. Maybe to cement some contendership status between both of them. But I think Hernandez needs to get right back in there and get another big win. Because I think that left more questions than answers against Trinaldo. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching this edition of Afterthoughts. My name is Johan Castro. Tune in next time. We'll see you later.